Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to What is Narrative For? I know in the program it said, what is narrative for anyway, but I did a little bait and switch. What this really is what is narrative for? A call to arms. So let's start at the beginning. Who am I and why am I telling you this? My name is Richard Dansky. Tonight I'll be getting the Lifetime Achievement Award from the IGD Game Writing SIG. Thank you. Which just means that I'm old. But I've worked on over 70 video game titles across multiple franchises and multiple roles. I have credits on numerous best-selling and award-winning games ranging from The Division to Assassin's Creed Nexus to Outland to you name it. I am the author of The Video Game Writer's Guide to Surviving an Industry That Hates You, a book whose working title was McDonald's French Fries because it's so salty. And I am also a novelist, a graphic novel author, a tabletop RPG writer, partially responsible for all those people hanging out in coffee houses pretending to be vampires, and a game designer, and some other stuff. So what is this talk? This is not about the creative value of narrative. We all know the creative value of narrative. It's what we do. If you don't understand the creative value of narrative, you are at the wrong conference. We are here to talk about the framing of the value of narrative to non-narrative people, because they're the people who have to learn it. We need to learn to speak about and communicate the function of narrative in production and the function of narrative for the bottom line, so they learn what we do, learn to appreciate it, and then in turn respect and support it and help us do our jobs better. That make sense, everybody? Yeah. Ooh, all right. Okay, and why do we need to do this? Because they don't understand the value of narrative beyond exposition. Originally the slide said dialogue, but I realized that was inaccurate. Really, the part of narrative they sort of kind of understand is exposition, info dumping the world to the player so the boxes can be checked, and not anything else. They do not understand what other value narrative offers, and they don't even really understand what narrative is. And since they don't have that understanding, they don't have that knowledge, they can't engage with it properly, and they certainly can't schedule it or budget or staff it properly. So as a result, they don't respect narrative. If they don't respect it, they don't support it. This leads to bad narrative, at which point management says, see, we got bad reviews on the narrative, so we shouldn't spend money on it. And the whole damn thing starts all over again. So yeah, this is what we need to prevent. We need to break this endless cycle. And that is what I'm here to talk to you about today. I want to give you the tools, the words, the weapons to go back to your studios and make the case for narrative, to make them understand the value, to make them understand it is not just words filling airtime, that it provides deep and lasting value to the team, to the audience, and to the bottom line. Okay, so yeah, we need to educate them. We need to educate producers so they can schedule us properly. We need to educate our fellow leads so they can sit at the meeting and not just go, and whatever narrative wants sucks, get rid of it. We need to educate team leadership so they understand that we need a seat at the table. And we need to educate studio management because studio management writes the checks. I mean, look, we have all been in that meeting, yes? Yeah, okay. Or worse, we have not been in that meeting when all the decisions got made and then they came back and said, yeah, so narrative, can you fix it? Yeah. Because they don't know, they don't understand. If they don't understand, they can't act on that understanding. And if they're not acting from a place of understanding, they are going to make decisions based on bad assumptions that lead to a lot of pain for us. How many people in this room got the, yeah, we got a problem, we had to cut this level, and there's this thing, so can narrative fix it now? Yeah, that was basically 10 years of my career at Ubisoft in one sentence. So I feel it, and I want it to never happen again. And let's be fair, I'm not trying to necessarily blame them. It's not necessarily their fault. This is not something they have professional training for. They have not been taught to think about this. They have not been taught to value it. It is not something that is part of their experience. And because it is not part of their experience, it's scary and they don't want to look it up and they don't know. So that means we have to push. We have to make the effort. We can't rely on them to say, I have a gap in my knowledge. Perhaps I should correct this. We have to be the ones to champion this, to educate them so we protect ourselves professionally. We are not holding up our responsibility to try and put ourselves in a position to do our best work if we don't do this. And we're putting ourselves in the firing line having to clean up after bad decisions or work in impossible ways, and then get blamed for it, or then get fired, or then get budgets reduced, or whatever else, if we don't advocate for ourselves and make them understand at the beginning of the cycle instead of trying to point out what the hell went wrong at the end. You with me on this? Okay, good. So, what is narrative not? It is not an add-on or a last-minute wrapper. How many people here have heard the term narrative wrapper? How many people here hate the term narrative wrapper with the white-hot passion of 1,000 burning suns? Because wrapper means something that is external. It is something that is added after the product is finished. If you're really lucky, you get a little bit of melted cheese sticks to the wrapper when you unwrap the sandwich, and that's it. No, we are not a wrapper. Narrative is not a wrapper. It never has been a wrapper. It never should be a wrapper. It is intrinsic to the game experience, and that needs to be understood. Furthermore, narrative is not divorced from gameplay because narrative provides context for gameplay. It is not extrinsic to the player experience. It is absolutely part of the player experience. The player experience is the unity of gameplay and narrative that the player then takes and tells their story through their actions. It is not they play and then they stop and there's some narrative and then they play. No, it is a unified synergistic experience that narrative is a full partner in. And no, it's not just dialogue and cutscenes and walls of text for briefings. It is imbued in pretty much every aspect of the game if you know where to look for it and if you're willing to really think about what the definition of narrative is. And by God, it is not just the story. How many people here have been asked, oh, so can you tell me the story? It's not just the story. It's never the story. The story is not even what we do. We create the narrative props and tools and elements that the player then interacts with to create their own story of their unique playthrough. They create it from our narrative elements. If somebody says, what's the story? It hasn't happened yet. And narrative is intrinsic to games, and all games have some narrative elements. It's not always a lot. It's not always all the words. It's not always dialogue or story, but it's always there. And before you stop, do not goddamn say Tetris. Every time I make this point in a discussion, somebody goes, but what about Tetris? No, Tetris has a narrative element. It is a tiny narrative element, but there's a reason the little dude who comes out in the middle and dances is wearing Russian clothing as opposed to anything else. That establishes the little tiny bit of narrative that frames where Tetris comes from and everything else about it. All right? You with me? Okay, good. So, where they get it wrong, they make assumptions, and these are uninformed assumptions. And the best ones you got are, narrative is just the stuff with the words. So you go do the word thing, and then when you're done, there's words, and we're happy. Yeah, no, we all know that's wrong because that generally means write whatever comes to mind the last 2 days, then we're going to put the first draft in the game. The worst case scenario is shut up and write 300 more variants on grenade. And that's not good either, because what that does is it takes the notion of narrative and shoves it away from the active player interaction in the game. The truth is, narrative is expressed through every element of a game, verbal, audio, and otherwise. It is in the design of every weapon, every item, every map, every book and audio log you find, every character design. They all reflect the narrative of the game world through their expression. So let's take a look at this picture. It's from The Division, which is a game that I was honored to be the lead writer on, Tom Clay's Division. And let's just take a look at this picture. What does this picture tell us? Let's unpack it. The hat and the coat, that says it's winter, right? The clothing and the graffiti, that says modern times. The graffiti says modern English, probably American. The dead body says this is a lawless scenario. The fact that the dead guy is in a hazmat suit means that we are in a dangerous, probably biohazardous environment. We're getting all that just from this one still image in a game with, I think, 89,000 barks alone. So, yeah, narrative is there. Narrative is just not just in the words. Narrative is in everything we present, and is something that we create in combination and collaboration with the rest of the team, and that needs to be made understood. And here's the litmus test, Minecraft. Everybody says there's no narrative in Minecraft. It's just a sandbox, right? Right? Wrong. How does Minecraft express narrative? Well, think about it. What tools do you get at the beginning? You get a little pickaxe, you get a shovel. You're not getting a Black & Decker anything. You're not getting a chainsaw. No, it's pastoral. It's handmade. Look at how the enemies are represented. Look at the seasons and the weather. Look at which animals are available. You're not seeing, for example, Tyrannosaurus Rexes. Look at the clothing choices. All of that tells the story of the world, establishing the narrative framework and letting the player build their own stories within it, but it's narrative work nonetheless. And this is something that we need to learn to convey. So what is narrative's game function? And that's pretty simple. Inside the game, it provides context for player action. It explains why pressing X is a sword attack, or a 3-round burst, or a jump, or an interaction, depending upon the context. It lays out the player fantasy, who they are pretending to be, and where they are pretending to be that character. It is the thing that transforms a game from ritual button presses into actions that feel like they have purpose and they have meaning. An X button can be anything. It can mean anything. What we do with that, that's narrative. What we make of it, that's narrative. And that's the magic that we bring to games, that we need to make everybody else understand. So let's talk about how narrative impacts the bottom line. Everyone's like, yes, it's story, but you can't sell story. I mean, what are you going to do? Put adverbs up for microtransactions? No. And this is a hard conversation to have, really. And it's one that not a lot of people are really prepared for, because it's not something that we as writers get trained to think about, we as narrative folks. But it's one you have to be able to make the case for. And yeah, it's hard because it's hard to quantify. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around because it is by and large not a quantifiable thing. An art asset looks like a thing or it doesn't. A feature works or it doesn't. Narrative is fuzzy around the edges. Some people like it. Some people don't like it. Some people don't like it because they wish they'd been the ones to write it. It happens. And it's hard to quantify. You can say 10 new weapons and have that as a DLC drop, and people understand what it is instantly and what's going to cost them. But you can't say 149 new lines of dialogue and have people get excited about that. It's hard to estimate. Narrative tasks are fluid and hard to extrapolate. And it doesn't turn directly into money most of the time. You can't just hit the narrative button and have money come out. So that's confusing to people. That bothers people. And that's something we have to explain past. You can sell a gun, you can sell a skin, you can calculate how much money they cost. It is much harder to sell a story, especially when the audience is conditioned to think that stuff is free. But at the same time, I assure you, there is narrative value to the bottom line, and we can explain it and make them understand. So, is there a business case to narrative? I would like to thank everybody over 55 in the room who got that joke. The rest of you, you'll get to it in a sort of roundabout fashion. Okay. Or to put it another way, no one has ever cosplayed as a game mechanic. And every time I say this, somebody goes, well, I saw somebody do Solid Snake with the exclamation point over their head, but no, that's not the point. Cosplayers are fans who love your game so much, they make costumes to show off their fandom. They are probably also fans who are going to spend money on stuff from your game. And the stuff they're interested in spending on comes from narrative elements. This is the key. This is the way in. This is the door. And specifically, this is what I call IA. So, and we will leave Cthulhu where he is resting for the moment. It's too hot for him right now anyway. But talk about investment and attachment and identification and anticipation. And these, more than anything else, are the 4 things narrative brings that you can explain as turning into money. What do I mean by investment? It means you provide characters and worlds that people get invested in, that they want to know more about and have more content for and spend more time in. Good characters and worlds are ones players put emotional energy into and that they feel invested in their success or failure going forward. If you do it right, you build a strong narrative base with iconic characters that people fall in love with and want to follow, then they'll keep buying stuff. They will buy the transmedia novels. They will keep playing the game. They will tell their friends about it, get them to come play the game with them. And this matters. This is important. This is something that narrative provides that nothing else can. Attachment. What do I mean by attachment? Players feel a personal connection to the material. They want it to succeed. They like it. They think highly of it. Build your narrative elements well and support them, and audiences will follow them everywhere. They'll follow them to new games. They'll follow them to new genres. They'll follow them to new media if they get attached to the material and want to be where it is. If it becomes something that's important to them, they're going to want to follow it if you do your narrative work well. Identification. What do I mean by identification? Players specifically identify with an aspect of narrative, usually with a particular character. You give the players something they see themselves in, the I am, not the I play. And I'm going to divert to a little anecdote here. Many years ago, I worked for White Wolf Game Studios making a game called Vampire: The Dark Ages. And we had these things called clan books, which were books about a specific type of vampire. And they were 72 pages, and they were a lot of money for the 72 pages. And then when I took over Vampire: The Dark Ages, like, hey, let's make 3-in-1 cover, and we'll give people 3 times as much content for twice as much money, and it'll be a great deal, and everybody's going to love them. And they absolutely bombed. Because I went out to talk to the fans, why we're giving you a much better deal. Why is this not working? They're like, oh, I didn't want to buy the material for those other 2 things. I just want to buy the material for the stuff that I am. And so the power of identification, the power that led these folks to get vampire clan symbol tattoos, things like that, that meant they would act in a way that was so powerful it was against their logical pocketbook interest. And that was a powerful lesson. It meant that we were creating something that was that meaningful that people identified with it, that they read it and said, I am this. They played it and said, I am this. And if you can give that to your players, again, they will come with you. And anticipation. I'm kind of disturbed by this quote, but Angela Carter was a fantastic author, so there we go. Anticipation means giving to them consistently, and they will build the habit of wanting more. And giving to them consistently means supporting with resources and time and visibility. If you throw one bit of narrative out there and it doesn't catch, you say, done. You're not doing this properly. If you're building the habit in your audience of coming back for more, hey, in 6 days, there's going to be new stuff. I can't wait to get it. Let me tell my friends. Then again, you are using narrative to support the business model of the game. So what does that add up to? Besides somebody in a very scary outfit. Good narrative content builds strong player loyalty. They evangelize your game. They produce the content. They wear your merch. They are out there for you, doing the things you can't do, talking to people you can't talk to, and in a way that comes from the good work that you have done with the narrative. No, these people are not buying pure uncut narrative unless you go transmedia, and there's no direct dollar in, dollar out formulation. But developed wisely with the long game in mind, narrative builds unshakable bonds to your game with your player base. And they turn around and buy sequels and DLC and skins and gear and you name it. They cosplay and they do lore videos and they write fanfic and they share all these things, functionally doing free marketing for the game in a way you never could. And this is to your game's benefit. This comes from doing narrative work well. Okay, so mandatory caveat before somebody gets upset, because somebody always gets upset. I am not saying narrative should exist simply as a mechanism for extracting cash for players. What I am saying is that you can demonstrate how investing in narrative can lead to increased revenue. You can then get your producers and your studio manager to say, hey, maybe we should invest more in narrative. Maybe we should give them more time. Maybe we should hire more narrative people. Maybe we should invest in good narrative tools. Maybe we should support this with transmedia and stuff on the website and things like that. Okay, this is about leveraging what we do in a way that will allow us to do it more and better by explaining it to other people in a way they can see the benefit. All right, this means more resources, more space, more time, more money. It helps us make better narrative content. And you know, in this day and age when jobs are kind of tenuous and companies are kind of weird, being able to demonstrate the economic value you bring is a powerful argument for staying employed. This is speaking to the suits in their language so they can understand it and internalize it. You can talk until you are blue in the face about paying off character arcs and how, you know, something in Mission 2 led to this really cool moment in Mission 12, and hey, we're going to pay this off in DLC, and you will look totally out of touch for trying to sell them on something they don't understand and don't care about. If you give them something they can understand intrinsically and say, hey, this cool thing is going to make people stick around for the next bit of content, then you've got a chance of getting what you want out of the discussion. Does that make sense, everybody? I swear I'm not a sellout. I'm not here on behalf of the students to say, please use the narrative to make us money. No, I am here to explain how we can leverage their understanding so we can do our jobs better. So mandatory transition slide. These are the six-toed Hemingway cats from Key West, Florida. So take a moment, calm down, look at the cats. So yeah, so we made the case to management. Now, how about we make a case to production and the rest of the team? How can we explain the value of narrative to them in a way that they see as beneficial to them? Because it totally is. And so we'll leave the cats behind. Let's talk about shared vision. Narrative's a way to communicate vision, it's a way to get teams on board, and it's a way to vet appropriate content. Every game I work on these days, I try and do a bit in team meetings called story time, where I will put on a silly hat, and then for 5 minutes, I will talk to the entire team about something we are doing in the narrative. Here's one character story. Here's one cool moment. Here's one plot point that we're going to be talking about. And I want to share it with them. I want to do internal marketing to the rest of the team about narrative to get them excited about it, to get them on board with it. Say, hey, this is a cool thing we're all making together, instead of, yeah, narrative's the weird folks over there in the dark room and noises come out of it sometimes. And so sharing that, bringing it forward, making that something that everybody on the team understands and shares in really provides a lot of value. It's the thing to get the whole team on board with the direction. I mean, after all, we are storytelling creatures, right? So if you sell your teammates on the story of the game's production, they're going to be in line with the needs and the ideas and the visions of narrative to help them do their jobs well in a way where it all comes together. They will have reference and a way to gut check what they're doing. You will have something that you can share with them and get them on board with and get them to bring ideas to you about, and everybody wins. So what does narrative do for the player? Okay, I know this is going to sound like heresy, but players want narrative. They really do. They may say they don't. They may say they skip the cutscenes, but they want narrative. There are elements they love. They just may not recognize their narrative. So, like I said, narrative provides context for the experience. It presents the raw material for the player's unique story, which is created by the way they specifically interact with the narrative components of the game. If you do it right, that story becomes memorable, and they run around and tell their story of what they did to all their friends. And you know what the first word of that story is every time? I. Exactly. Thank you. Because it becomes their story. You help them tell their story. You created something there with them through the narrative work. That's valuable. So let them write their own story using all the elements your narrative team sets up, and they will build their best story, the one they want to tell other people in a way that makes them want to experience, and then their friends will want to experience it. And they want to experience it again and again. Hey, let's do a replay. That is what narrative provides for the player. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means that narrative absolutely has value to others, right? It has value to artists. It has value to audio engineers. It has value that needs to be demonstrated clearly so we get the time and the space and the support to do it. But once it is demonstrated, once we get that time and space, it leads to better things. And what better things? Well, like I said, better production. It means more time for narrative, time to set the narrative up, time to iterate, time to polish, time to get feedback. Better bottom line, you invest in good narrative stuff, that turns into better action figures. It turns to better vision and cohesion. If you have enough support for narrative, that brings narrative in the room in the conversations where people are talking about level design and art and everything else that lets you unify it to create an experience that's not going to break the player's immersion. It means better narrative support. It means the team gets behind narrative better to allow us, again, to do our jobs, to allow us to make better narrative, to allow us to create bigger and better things that tie in more tightly with the rest of the game. And we're not scrambling to catch up. We're not putting Band-Aids on sucking chest wounds. We're not having to deal with last-minute crises that we don't have the bandwidth or the time or the people to properly address. And ultimately, what does it mean? It means better narrative, right? And you know what? You get good scores for narrative in a game, they're going to notice. They're going to give you a little more leeway for narrative in the next one, let you do it even better. Everybody wins, especially us. Whole thing feeds on itself in a good way. So, important caveat. I am not advocating for narrative and just narrative and only narrative. All right? I have what I call Dansky's first and second laws of game writing. The first one is that writing is the cheapest solution until it's suddenly the most expensive solution. And the second one is that adding more detailed exposition is never the answer. And those are the go-to one-twos that a lot of teams have when there are narrative problems. I am saying that narrative is an important part of this nutritious breakfast, so to speak. It is an important part of the team. It is something that needs to be supported and that we need to make the case for them to support so we can help everybody else out. But it still needs to be staffed properly, scheduled properly, resourced properly, supported by team leadership, and executed properly. And these are the tangible things that need to get narrative up to snuff and make sure it is functional. There needs to be that resource, human and otherwise, consultants, resource materials, things like that. I mean, we've all seen the videos on on Far Cry Primal, they brought a language consultant in to build a whole new language just for the game. That's narrative support. That's fantastic. More games deserve stuff like that. The value needs to be demonstrated. There needs to be time to do this properly. There needs to be a willingness and effort to integrate narrative into workflow properly. So this means, among other things, you don't take a month and a half to give feedback on a one-page script that we need to record 3 weeks previously, all right? You need to respect the fact that narrative is an equal part of the game and give it your attention and time and value so that it can be performed with the same level of care and support as every other aspect of the game. There needs to be proper understanding and scoping of what tasks entail, which means actually talking to narrative. The easy narrative ask isn't always easy. These are things that we have all run up against, right? So we need to take the stuff I've talked about today and push back and explain to them why they need to give us the respect, where the value is, and how it benefits them as well as us to approach narrative in this new, more respectful, more serious way. And a second important caveat, narrative is an important thing. It's not the only thing. Originally, I was going to do this entire slide in Batman voice, but I've been dealing with sore throat all week, so that got mixed. Again, lots of stuff here about how I am not saying that narrative trumps everything, and neither should you, but it is important and it needs to be held in the same regard with the same support as every other aspect of a game. How many of you have worked on a game where a level design went out first draft? Is this something you ever want to do again? Okay, how about a character model? This is not good, right? But most of us, the models get iteration, right? The levels get play tested. The features get tested. The weapons get balanced, right? Over and over and over again. There's play tests, there's time, there's polish, there's drafts. We need to get that as well. We need to get to a place where we get the same professional respect so we can produce the same professional effect. And it's not narrative versus gameplay. It never has been. It's how does narrative work with gameplay, work with art, work with audio to make the best play experience possible. That is really what it comes down to. We make the best narrative by working with everybody else, by letting everybody else let us do our work, and we all win. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, cool. And so that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I believe we have a bunch of time for questions, if anybody.
Okay, so I don't think you covered this in the talk. How do you deal with questions as a way to make your case? And I'm going to give you extreme examples of like, you're trying to make a case of like, we should have narrative like this. Look at this game. They did it. It's like, this is how well it works, and it's been successful. And the response to that is usually like, well, that's a fluke. Versus you need time, you need narrative development, reproduction. And I've heard this a couple of times already. Oh, Death Stranding did the whole narrative in the last 3 months. I don't know what it's about. So we don't need that. So it's like, how do you leverage examples, or do you just avoid examples if you're making this high level arguments?
Okay, so the question is, how exactly do you frame the argument? When people are going to say, well, Kojima did it this way, the obvious response is, are you Kojima? But then they tend to get upset if you ask that. But I have found that really the successful way is to start small and then build. So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, we are thinking of adding this stuff to this game, I will say, okay, so if you want to add that little aspect to the quest, that means we're going to need 2 more speaking characters, which means casting and recording time. We're going to need another at least 3 weeks of writing time, iteration, and polish. We're going to need the audio. We're going to need this. So here's how much that little thing's going to cost. Alternately, here is a way we can achieve that same effect by changing 6 lines of dialogue that already exist, which is much cheaper. And so once you start speaking to them in the language of dollars and cents, they become more and more inclined to listen to you. And eventually you can sort of then move into, okay, by saving these dollars and cents, we're also doing better art. We're already making better game. And then they will start listening to you on that level. And you can't, it's really hard to just throw the flag in the ground and say, no, we must do it this way right off the bat. You need to convince them and you need to give them concrete examples. And the concrete examples sadly start with dollars and cents and hours on the schedule. Yeah. Sure.
So I'm wondering kind of what the first step has looked like in your experience, how you recommend when it comes to bringing all of these frameworks and all of these tools as an argument. Do you prepare a presentation and then just message somebody and select like, hey, I'd like to talk to you about the narrative team. Is it like in a general channel, or how have you gone about that, and how would you recommend people take that first step to bring all of these knowledges into potentially going your narrative?
Okay. The question is, how do you go about bringing this stuff to other members of the team and people? And I have always favored the multi-front attack method, which is to say, I don't just say, hey, I'd like to give a presentation on the value of narrative. Instead, I will be in a meeting with someone, say the art director, and say, hey, if we give you this stuff for the narrative, here's where it can save you some time. If I'm in a meeting with audio, talk about what they want in terms of the character casting sides and things like that, and where I can save them money and time doing things on my end. If I'm talking to production, I'll say, hey, we're currently scheduled like this, but if you give us 2 more weeks, we can do these things, and that will mean that the pickup sessions on the back end will be 50% shorter, and that'll save us a lot of money. And you can't win the fight with just the big stand-up at the beginning. You need to hit everybody where they live in small, discrete, easily provable cases, and then you build on victory after victory after victory. And it is not a seamless ascent. It is not perfect every time. There are people who will tell you just get stuffed, whatever. There are people who won't believe you. There are people who get offended that you're trying to tell them their business. But you have to keep trying. And if they rebuff you, you retreat gracefully and you wait for the next opportunity. It's a process and it's an ongoing campaign. But the sooner you start it, the sooner you see some results. Does that make sense? Sure thing. Okay, cool. Well, up in the back there.
So kind of the first half is about potentially and then the second half is about how would you get this supporting for people who are working in teams where teams are responsible with the value of narrative. Besides feedback, are there other things that teams and narrative friends can to structure and enforce that development of that narrative, like you mentioned, and meshing and development.
Okay, so I apologize if I did not hear you correctly. Talking about other things narrative folks can do to convince their teams of the value and constantly engage with them on that level. Is that correct?
Yeah, or other than to convince the value of things that small teams can do to work to incorporate development of narrative along with the development of other aspects.
Okay, yeah, so ways to incorporate the development of narrative through development. Conversations need to be ongoing. And you want to do these in a way that production is not going to freak out that, oh my God, the narrative person talked to the level designer and we didn't know about it. But within appropriate channels, you want to say, hey, was thinking about this space, that you're building. It's really cool. And here's some of the narrative stuff we're doing here. What do you think about some graffiti on the wall here that would hint at this other thing? Or, hey, do you have any ideas about, you're building the space. are there specific aspects here, unique things that I could build into character dialogue? And you just keep those small conversations going constantly, build the back and forth, build the connection, make sure people are comfortable talking to you and listening to you, and that way you can cross-pollinate more regularly and more effectively and down to the most granular of levels where it feels seamless as opposed to just, always slap the big thing in here. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Sure, absolutely. There.
How do you get more convincing about later but you're now expected to bring like narrative cohesions, and they don't really want to be added onto time because a lot of this feels like it's kind of focused on. What do you want to notice?
Okay, so if I heard you correctly, and I apologize, my ears are still not up to snuff after a rather nasty week of congestion. Talking about how do you present the stuff if you don't necessarily have the data, right?
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, sorry. We're even. No, we're talking about how to present the stuff when you don't necessarily have the data, when you don't necessarily have, just.
Or when you're coming into a project with information, so you're not kind of setting it up from the start, and maybe there's a lot of pieces and assets that don't really match well with this narrative, they don't want to be added.
Yeah, okay. Then you are doing triage. In the words of the late great television show MASH, meatball surgery. And the first thing you have to do is assess everything that's there, and you sort of categorize, okay, this is a quick fix, this is a more expensive fix, this is a really expensive fix. And you look at those fixes and you say, okay, this one's going to take 6 work hours. This one's going to take two days worth. This is going to take a week. And then you basically cook up the attack plan with options, and you present that, say, here are the issues we are dealing with. Here's what is going to cost us on the back end to fix them. If we don't do anything about them, it's going to be 2 weeks of reshoots. We're going to get clobbered on Metacritic for this thing here, specifically because these 2 other games got hit for the exact same thing. Instead, here is a quick fix that we can do quick and dirty in 1 week. Here is a more intensive fix. Here is an even more intensive fix that requires to hire a freelancer for 1 month. And you give them the options so they feel like they have agency in it. You give them as much research you can in terms of at least knowing how much time something's going to take so they can make informed decisions, and then you go from there. You cannot walk in and say, all this is broken, fix it, doesn't matter what it takes. You walk in and you give them the options as to how much they want to invest in fixing and what the payoff will be on the back end. All the way at the back?
Maybe a little related to that last question, but how do you get better at developing and providing these estimates to the producers at the team, especially if your product is simply adapting to more narrative systems that we've experienced?
Okay, the question is, how do you build these estimates? And part of it is simply experience and practice and getting a good sense of how quickly you write quality, and how quickly your feedback loops turn stuff around. Part of it is coming to conferences like this and engaging in online communities and picking the brains of people who've been doing this and building as much of a data set as you can. And there is no perfect answer. There is no ultimate, yes, this is how long it takes to fix these things, but you know your own word rate. You should, if you're on a team, you should have a good sense of how fast your teammates work. You should have a sense of how quickly other people turn around feedback. And you make a best guess, and then you inflate it a little, just because things always go wrong, and you go from there. And the further you go and the more experience you have, then you can refine that estimate.
How do you navigate? So every game director has their own idea of how much narrative should permeate or what their definition of narrative is. How do you continuously advocate? Say you come onto a project and their idea of narrative is still that please write these 300 lines that say grenade over and over again, and you keep trying to be like, I can do more than this. This is how we think like narrative can be of value to this project. But you're continuously getting critical on it. Is there anything to prevent?
Okay, so the question is, how do you make the case when you're dealing with a creative director or a game director who just wants you to write 300 variations on grenade? And the best way to do that, and I hate to phrase it this way, is get allies. Because what is going to happen is you say, I can do more, they're going to say, oh, you've got a personal stake in this. You can't be trusted. But if you get the art director coming saying, hey, I could really use narrative's help in describing these characters and doing some world building so that my artists have a reference to work from. If you can get the audio engineer to say, hey, I was thinking maybe some audio logs would be cool, and I think we can get narrative to write those. If you get the other people to do it, then suddenly it's not just you, and it's not as easily dismissible. And I will tell a story out of school here. I was working on a project where the senior producer and the creative director wanted to reuse some assets from a previous title, and narrative did a deep dive and came up with several reasons this was impossible. And we were told, no, we were just making up and we just didn't want to do it and blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't until the audio director came and said, no, we can't use these, that the producer went, oh, now let's do something else. I just want to make clear there was no murder after that. But yeah, getting friends, getting allies, convincing everyone of the value of narrative and how it can help them will then help you.
My question, you're explaining how one of the games had hired someone to develop a language how do you show value in that? Obviously, if you look at Star Trek, clearly there's a fan value in having different languages, but how do you use someone on the team convince someone to, prompt that kind of external expense?
So the question is, I think, how to demonstrate the value of different languages in a game.
Or features that would then require more than just providing.
Okay, so or features that go just beyond text. And the best thing you can do there is look at examples. Look at competing games that have similar features and say, hey, this got bullet pointed out in 12 different reviews when these other folks did it. And I think we can do it with this allocation of resources, and it's a narrative-driven feature, but it also involves these folks. And let's get, can I ask them for their feedback and their input as to the estimate? And get them on board so that the estimate is unified and you're all presenting it together and you're all agreed on the value. And then you can make a stronger case than just something that can be unfortunately dismissed as, oh, narrative just wants to write more words. Okay. Anybody else?
In the first half of the conversation, it seems like there's a lot of ways to get by from other members. Point out how what they're producing is part of narrative, choice of events to build, interest levels, etc. Same path and everything. When you're having that kind of like back and forth dialogue, where you're kind of looking for things to help reinforce narrative, is there a line that you should try to keep as far as when that give and take relationship starts to go in the other direction, where now level design constraints?
Write the narrative?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So where do you draw the line in the back and forth with other disciplines? It goes both ways. As narrative, you don't want to do the thing that physicists do at cocktail parties and say, well, actually, chemistry is physics. And then they get punched, and that's the end of the party. You don't want to say, well, your thing's actually narrative. No. Narrative can help inform what you're doing, and you can help inform the narrative. The thing you want to do is be very careful about establishing the boundaries for feedback. Always be open to ideas. Always give an explanation of what you're going to do with that idea. And that can be, yeah, that's great. Maybe we can, love it. Thank you so much. It can be, that's a really interesting idea. Maybe if we took it and did this with it, and that would actually save a bunch of work, that works really well. If you're going to say no, and honestly, 9 times out of 10, you're going to say no, because they are not narrative professionals and they're spitballing. And while it may be really exciting and cool, it may not be appropriate, it may not be feasible. There's a million reasons their idea may not work. Starting with the fact that they just don't have that internal editor already. What you do is say, that's a great idea, but I don't think we can use it right now because. And you explain why. You say, I really like this aspect of it. Maybe we can adapt that. But if we want to do what you've suggested, that's going to mean this extra work and this extra load on you. And I don't want to do that. And let's keep the idea in the idea file. And maybe we come back to it later. In the meantime, here's the part I'm going to take and run with. And that way you don't feel like nobody feels like they're getting shut down. Nobody feels like they're being dismissed. Nobody feels like they're being kept out of the walled garden. You're always keeping the conversation going. Does that make sense? Yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the best designers I ever worked with. Absolutely great designer, but his default reaction to an idea was no. And then he would think for about half a second, say, here's why, and here's this, and he would come up with these brilliant assessments of why it wouldn't work, and deep thought, and he's thinking about 10 knock-on effects and all that, and he's understanding instantly, absolutely brilliant. But all anybody he ever talked to heard was no. And so he was not beloved on the team, and he ran into a lot of friction, and it was not the happiest working relationship, and nobody got to do their best work. Okay. We're good?
Can I just comment on that? My phrase is, what's I gonna worry about? And then come back a day later and explain why, because if you explain why right away, they think you're making shit up if you don't want to listen. And they don't see that
You thought about it. Yeah.
your head instantaneously.
That's a really good idea. Let me get back to you on that note. Okay. Yeah, but thank you all so much for coming. It has been a pleasure. And I hope some of you will be coming out to join us at Write Club tonight for improvisational, humorous game writing competition. Thank you all. Good night.